The gala was supposed to be a glamorous escape, a corporate event my wife, Emily, insisted we attend. "It's important for my career," she said, her voice carrying that practiced charm she often used in her professional world. Her smile, once warm and comforting, had become something rehearsed, as though she wore it for show. We lived in Seattle, a city known for its vibrant culture and rainy skies. The gala was held in a downtown skyscraper with floor-to-ceiling windows showcasing the glittering skyline. It was the kind of event where champagne flowed endlessly, and people dressed in suits that cost more than a month of our rent. Emily looked stunning in a sapphire blue dress that hugged her figure in all the right ways. Heads turned as we entered the room, and I couldn't help but feel a flicker of pride. At 33, she had an air of confidence that commanded attention. But lately, there was something off. She was always distracted, her phone rarely left her hand, and she'd been working late more nights than I could count. Conversations felt surface level, as though her mind was elsewhere. I didn't want to seem paranoid. Emily had always been ambitious, and her boss, David, demanded the best from everyone in his orbit. But something about him made me uneasy. At 39, he was charismatic, always wearing a tailored suit and that smug smirk that lingered just a second too long when he spoke to her. I told myself it was harmless, she would never cross that line. I wanted to trust her. But as the night wore on, Emily seemed unusually distant. She wasn't at the bar or mingling with colleagues like she usually did. I scanned the room, my heart sinking as I realized she was nowhere to be found. Just as I reached for my phone to text her, I spotted her. Or rather, I spotted her dress, the unmistakable sapphire blue, disappearing through a side door. David was right behind her, his hand resting on the small of her back. My stomach twisted. "It's nothing," I told myself. Maybe she needed to discuss work privately. But as I watched them slip through the door, an instinct I couldn't ignore kicked in. I followed. The hallway was quiet, a stark contrast to the lively chatter and music in the ballroom. My footsteps echoed as I neared the slightly ajar door at the end of the corridor. I paused, my heart pounding in my chest, straining to hear what was happening inside. Muffled voices. Laughter. And something else, a sound that made my blood run cold. I pushed the door open without thinking, the weight of dread crashing over me. There they were. Emily was perched on the edge of the desk, her dress hiked up, while David leaned into her, his hand on her thigh. Time seemed to freeze. My breath caught, and I felt like the air had been sucked out of the room. The image seared itself into my mind, an unwelcome scar I knew would never fade. What the hell is this? My voice cracked as I finally found the words. Emily's head snapped toward me, her eyes wide with shock. But it wasn't guilt that followed, it was irritation. David backed away immediately, stammering something about misunderstandings as he adjusted his tie. Emily didn't move. She crossed her arms, her expression hardening into something cold and unrecognizable. "Ethan, what are you doing here?" she said, her tone laced with annoyance rather than remorse. I couldn't respond. My vision blurred with anger as I turned to David. He raised his hands defensively, but it only fueled my rage. "Get out of here," he said weakly, his tone trembling. But he wasn't in control anymore. Without thinking, my fist collided with his jaw, sending him stumbling backward into the desk. The sound of the impact echoed in the room, followed by the clatter of a lamp shattering on the floor. Emily screamed, but I didn't care. I grabbed David by his collar, pulling him upright as my voice roared through the small office. "You think you can touch my wife?" He stammered apologies, but they were drowned out by the sound of my fist connecting with him again. Emily lunged at me, her nails clawing at my arm. "Ethan, stop it. You're going to ruin everything." "Ruin everything?" I barked, turning to her. "You mean like you just ruined us?" David slumped to the floor, groaning. Emily's face twisted in anger as she pointed toward the door. "You're acting insane. Go home before you make this worse." The audacity of her words made me laugh bitterly. "Make this worse? You've already done that, Emily." She crossed her arms again, her defiance more infuriating than the betrayal itself. "Maybe if you weren't so predictable, I wouldn't have needed this," she said, her voice sharp and venomous. For a moment, the room went silent. Her words hit me like a freight train. I stared at her, realizing the woman I thought I knew, the one I'd spent 10 years with, was gone, or maybe she had never truly been there. I couldn't stay in that room any longer. The sight of Emily, her icy glare, and David, cowering like a coward, made my stomach turn. The weight of betrayal pressed down on me, suffocating. I stormed out, my footsteps heavy against the marble floor, leaving behind the sounds of faint music and murmured conversations from the party. Outside, the cold Seattle air hit me like a slap, sharp and unforgiving. I leaned against a nearby pillar, struggling to catch my breath, my thoughts racing. How could she do this? The woman I'd loved for 10 years, who had stood by me at the altar and promised forever, had ripped my world apart in a matter of minutes. My phone buzzed in my pocket, a dull vibration against the chaos in my head. I pulled it out, glancing at the screen. It was a message from my younger brother, Luke. "Hey, haven't heard from you in a while. Everything good?" For a moment, I stared at the words, debating whether to respond. What could I even say? "No, Luke, nothing is good. My wife is a liar, a cheater, and everything I believed in was a lie." I shoved the phone back into my pocket without replying. I needed to get away. My hands trembled as I ordered a ride through an app, avoiding eye contact with the valet staff hovering nearby. I couldn't even face the thought of driving myself home. Minutes later, a black SUV pulled up. I slid into the back seat, mumbling a hoarse thanks to the driver, who nodded and pulled away from the building. The silence in the car was unbearable. My mind replayed the scene over and over, Emily perched on the desk, David's smug face, her biting words, "Maybe if you weren't so predictable." Each memory felt like a fresh stab in the chest. The driver glanced at me through the rearview mirror. "Rough night?" he asked cautiously. "Something like that," I muttered, not wanting to explain. He nodded and didn't press further, which I appreciated. The streets of downtown Seattle blurred past, the lights of the city a cruel contrast to the darkness settling in my chest. When we finally pulled up to my house, I handed the driver a tip and stepped out, the crisp night air biting at my skin. The house loomed in the darkness, its familiar outline now feeling foreign, almost hostile. This was supposed to be our sanctuary, the place where we built our life together. But now, every corner seemed tainted by her betrayal. Inside, the silence was deafening. I dropped my keys on the counter and stared at the framed photos lining the walls. There we were on our wedding day, beaming with joy. Another photo showed us at Lake Chelan, the sun setting behind us. Every image felt like a lie now, a facade hiding the cracks that had always been there. I grabbed the nearest photo and hurled it across the room. The glass shattered against the wall, the sound echoing like a gunshot in the empty house. It wasn't enough. I grabbed another and another, smashing them to pieces until shards of glass and fragments of our life together littered the floor. Finally, I sank onto the couch, my head in my hands. Anger gave way to despair, and the weight of her betrayal crushed me. Tears stung my eyes, but I refused to let them fall. She didn't deserve my tears. The sound of the front door creaking open snapped me out of my thoughts. Emily stepped inside, her heels clicking against the hardwood floor. She froze when she saw the mess, shattered glass and scattered photos across the living room. "What the hell, Ethan?" she asked, her voice sharp with irritation. I didn't look at her. "Don't," I said, my tone cold and flat. "You don't get to walk in here and act like everything is fine." She sighed, dropping her purse on the counter. "Ethan, can we not do this tonight? I'm exhausted." I laughed bitterly, finally looking up at her. "Oh, you're exhausted? Must be tiring sneaking around and screwing your boss." Her face hardened, her defensive mask slipping into place. "I told you not to make this about David. This is about us." I stood, unable to contain the fury building inside me. "There is no us anymore, Emily. You made sure of that the moment you decided to cheat. Don't act like you're innocent in all of this," she snapped, crossing her arms. "You think being a good husband means paying the bills and telling me I look nice? That's not enough, Ethan. I needed more." "More?" I echoed, incredulous. "What more could you possibly want? I gave you everything." "Exactly," she shot back, her voice rising. "You gave and gave, but you never asked me what I wanted. You just assumed it was enough." "Well, it wasn't." Her words hit like a punch to the gut. For a moment, I stood there, stunned. Was she right? Had I been so focused on being a good provider that I missed the cracks forming in our marriage? No. This wasn't my fault. She had a choice. She could have talked to me, told me how she felt. Instead, she chose to lie, to cheat, to destroy everything. "You don't get to twist this around," I said, my voice low and dangerous. "You don't get to justify what you did. If you were unhappy, you should have said something. Instead, you threw it all away." Emily rolled her eyes, the sheer disrespect of the gesture stoking the fire inside me. "Stop playing the victim, Ethan. You're not as perfect as you think you are." Her words were the final straw. "You need to leave," I said, my tone steady and cold. Her eyes widened. "Excuse me?" "You heard me. Pack your things and go. You can stay with David or whoever else you've been seeing. But you're not staying here." Her face twisted with anger, but she didn't argue. Instead, she turned on her heel and stormed upstairs. The sound of her slamming the bedroom door echoed through the house. The next morning, the house was eerily silent. Emily's door remained closed, and I wasn't interested in speaking to her. I made myself a strong cup of coffee, each sip sharpening my resolve. This wasn't a life I could continue. I needed to move forward. Later that afternoon, the doorbell rang. I wasn't expecting anyone, so I hesitated before answering. Standing on the porch was a woman I didn't recognize. She looked to be in her early 30s, with shoulder-length dark brown hair and a determined expression. "Ethan Clark?" she asked, her voice calm but tinged with tension. "Yes," I replied cautiously. "Can I help you?" "I'm Hannah," she said, straightening her posture. "David's wife." Her words hit me like a punch to the gut. For a moment, I just stared at her, unsure of what to say. She shifted awkwardly, clutching a small folder in her hands. "I found out about David and Emily weeks ago," she continued, her voice tight. "He confessed after I confronted him. I thought maybe we could help each other." I stepped aside, motioning her inside. She perched on the edge of the couch, much like I had after leaving the gala. Her hands trembled slightly as she placed the folder on the coffee table. "This is everything I could find," she said. "Emails, text messages, even expense records. I had a friend recover some of it from David's work laptop." I hesitated before opening the folder. Inside were pages of correspondence between David and Emily. Their messages were flirtatious and mocking, filled with private jokes that felt like knives cutting into my skin. They hadn't just betrayed us, they'd laughed at us, treated us like oblivious fools. Hannah broke the silence. "I've already filed for divorce. David's been staying with his brother, but I told him he's not setting foot in my house again. I thought you'd want these for your case." I looked up at her, my voice thick. Thank you. I'm sorry you're going through this. She nodded, her expression hard. Don't be. I'm done being the victim. David made his choices, and now he has to live with them. Her strength was admirable, and it reignited a spark in me. If she could face this nightmare head-on, so could I. That evening, I confronted Emily with the evidence. She was in the kitchen, scrolling on her phone, when I dropped the folder onto the counter. Her eyes flicked to it before narrowing. "What's this?" she asked, feigning disinterest. "Proof," I said, my tone sharp. "Emails, texts, expense records, everything from David's wife." Her face hardened. "You went digging into my private life?" "Don't deflect," I snapped. "Answer the question." Emily rolled her eyes, crossing her arms. "What do you want me to say, Ethan?" "Yes, I slept with him. Yes, I lied to you. But what does it matter now? You've already decided I'm the villain." "Because you are," I shot back. "You didn't just break your vows, you humiliated me. You betrayed everything we built." Her lips curled into a sneer. "Maybe if you weren't so damn boring, I wouldn't have needed to look elsewhere." Her words stoked the fire in my chest, but I forced myself to stay calm. "Pack your things," I said. "I've already spoken to a lawyer. We're done." Her confidence faltered for the first time. "You're serious?" "Dead serious," I replied. "I don't want to see you here tomorrow." Emily's defiance returned. "Fine. But don't think you're going to walk away with everything. I've given just as much to this marriage as you have." I laughed bitterly. "You gave, huh? Funny how that looks a lot like taking." The court proceedings came faster than I expected. Emily's lawyer painted her as a neglected wife, while my lawyer, Daniel, laid out the hard evidence. Emails, texts, receipts, it all told a clear story of betrayal and deceit. The judge was unimpressed by Emily's claims. After weeks of back and forth, the ruling was in my favor. Emily was denied spousal support and ordered to reimburse the funds she had misappropriated for her affair. When the gavel fell, it was like a weight lifted from my shoulders. Emily stormed out of the courtroom, her face a mix of fury and humiliation. As she passed me, she hissed, "You'll regret this." I met her glare with a calm I hadn't felt in months. "The only thing I regret is wasting 10 years on you." The following weeks were a whirlwind of adjustments. The house felt emptier without Emily, but it also felt lighter. I boxed up every reminder of her, the photos, the trinkets, the souvenirs, and left them on the curb for her to pick up. I wasn't holding on to anything anymore. Hannah and I kept in touch. She was navigating her own divorce, fighting to protect her 2 young daughters from David's toxic influence. We found solace in each other's strength, sharing updates and words of encouragement. Over time, our conversations grew more personal. She understood my pain in a way no one else could. One evening, I invited her over for dinner. We talked for hours, the weight of our past slowly lifting as laughter filled the room. For the first time in months, I felt something I thought I'd lost: hope. "You're stronger than you realize," Hannah said, her eyes meeting mine. "You've been through hell, but you didn't let it destroy you." "So have you," I replied. She smiled, and in that moment, I knew I wasn't just moving on, I was rebuilding. Looking back, I realized the experience taught me more than I could have imagined. I learned to value myself, to set boundaries, and to recognize red flags before it was too late. Most importantly, I learned that betrayal doesn't define you. It might break you for a time, but it also gives you the opportunity to rebuild, stronger, wiser, and more resilient. To anyone going through something similar, my advice is this: don't let someone else's actions rob you of your self-worth. You deserve better, and better is out there if you're willing to fight for it. Emily had taken a lot from me, but she hadn't taken everything. And as I looked toward the future, one thing was certain: I was finally free.